Okay. With that, we're moving to our next discussion on digital modernization for customers in the federal landscape. So with that, we'll let the CGI Microsoft Fast Track team lead this discussion. Thank you.
All right. So thank you. Thank you so much. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on your location. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So my name is Ray Martinez. I'm a Microsoft account executive based out of San Francisco, and I'm really excited to share with you today this transformational story. This is kind of one of those stories where you see that you're going to be able to see that there's still a lot of wrong perceptions out there around the cloud about what is a cloud journey. There's still a lot of misconceptions, especially in the federal space, and around the real potential, what you can achieve with a public cloud like Azure. So here's the agenda that we're going to follow throughout the next 7 hours of our presentation. So bear with us. No, I'm joking. So at the end, please feel free to post your questions into the chat window. We will be more than happy to address them. Let's start by introducing our customer. Our customer core business is in the aerospace vertical, the aerospace industry, and their main end customer are from the public sector, federal, local government. As a little bit of a background, and I think most of the people in this audience may know, customers in this space, they are in this industry, they are subject to the most strict set of regulations, compliance, and data protection requirements, right? And those requirements are the one that throughout the years have infused this kind of myth, this kind of misconception, as I said before, this idea of, okay, we cannot leave our on-premises world. The cloud is just a thing that is not for us, right? Moreover, with this particular customer, to add to the mix, this is a customer that had an accumulated technical debt for 10 years for various reasons, right? So this whole thing started, and that was the main opportunity for us to weigh in, is in the first half of 2019. One of their main end customers gave them some sort of an ultimatum, and they were demanding compliance with a bunch of standards such as, FedRAMP High, ATO, DFARS, ITAR, you name it, by the end of the calendar year. That's when we saw our way in and an opportunity to try to position Azure Government Cloud as the most trusted and compliant cloud. And to take a little bit more of the details on the requirements on the project, here you go. So the basic use case is they wanted to have all their on-prem file shares compliant to those standards. Geo Redundant, HA, highly available, protected, and capable of still giving an optimal user experience. And the challenges, again, this is a customer that had a serious technical debt accumulated throughout the years. They didn't have the inventory of the data set that they wanted to migrate. There were no encryption mechanisms for data at transit or at rest at the last mile, and they didn't have enough bandwidth for a data migration, right? So this is where the myth comes in, right? So right from the get-go, when you see this kind of challenges, this kind of situations, and candidly, this is very much expected, right? It's very easy that the customer embraces a mindset where they're going to discard the cloud, right? They're going to say, no, how can I be compliant with my data if I'm someone else's infrastructure? Or how can I even going to migrate to the cloud without the proper bandwidth, right? They start adopting this unconscious bias that that having compliance is just something not possible. And I think this is the part of our presentation that you will enjoy the most. Basically, because I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to the real magicians in this project. So what we were able to do is we had a close partnership with CGI Federal and the Azure Fast Track team, and we were able to position Azure Government as the destination for this Geo Redundant cloud-based distributed file system. We were able to migrate before the deadline around 2.7 petabytes of data that were sitting in 16 on-prem location. This is something that we need to call out. This win would have not been possible without our legal desk in Microsoft, the legal desk. It's called SELA, because ton of legal and clarifications were done. We needed to provide all the certifications, all the attestations, and the proof that Microsoft Azure Government was going to give the compliance and every requirement that they were asking, right? They were even requesting to know what kind of background checks was done to our personnel working in our local data center. So all of this was done. So Microsoft SELA, our legal desk, is definitely something that can help you in the field. Make sure to leverage that. And of course, besides that, we had a very creative combination of technologies and strategies, and that's the part that we're gonna explain in the next slide. A very creative set of technologies that allow us to overcome those challenges, and that's what my peer is going to explain you about, John Blanding. So John, take it away. I'm gonna switch to your slide.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. And again, when we're talking about this difficult customer, one of the big challenges that we had were to meet some of those data requirements. We looked at the Microsoft Commercial Cloud, we looked at the Gov Cloud, and the two things I want to point out here that for this particular customer, we looked at FedRAMP High and the ITAR compliance that the US Gov Cloud had for our customer, and it fit the bill. So we put this into US Gov. And this is where the starting point was, where we looked at the Azure Fast Track team. We went to the Fast Track team and asked them to help us and kind of guide us down the journey to make sure that we could do the transformation that this customer was requesting. So when we drew up the architecture with the Fast Track team, we looked at two regions in Azure Government, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. We have 16 locations that this unstructured data would be accessed from. So we thought it'd be best to distribute it across the United States, put the data close to the customer, and allow them to skinny down that latency you sometimes see across the pipe. The red lines represented at the top were our DFS replication. That was there to provide that high availability and redundant solution that they did not have on-prem with the technical debt that they had occurred over the years. And looking below that, you know, per the Fast Track team's guidance, we followed the Microsoft best practices in a typical hub spoke deployment. So, and as we did that, we were looking at an IP space large enough to help our customer continue to grow and follow that transformation path down to enable them to add additional features and functionality within Microsoft Azure to get out of that technical debt. So when we sat with the Fast Track team, we looked at Microsoft Data Box. We can get to the next slide, which is a little more redundant, but how we completed that 2.7 petabytes of data and that move, we sat down with the Fast Track team, and there's really two options from Microsoft. There's the Data Box Gateway and the Azure Stack Edge. Those are basically online tools that will do the data migration via the network for you. So you have an online and offline option with Microsoft. The Data Box Gateway and the Azure Stack Edge allow you to do that online data transfer into the Microsoft Cloud. And make sure that you can transfer that. Or you have the offline option using DataBox, which is basically copying it to a large device, one of the three options on the right-hand side of the slide, and putting it on a truck and shipping it to Azure. We looked at the technical debt, we looked at the network, we looked at a lot of the different things, and the best choice for this particular customer was to use the DataBox option, the 100 terabytes. We had to order dozens of them. One of the lessons learned, and one of the most important things I think that we learned is, if you're going to perform a large-scale data migration, make sure you order 1 or 2 extra data boxes just in case one fails if you have a tight timeline like we did. The data box heavy on the far right-hand side, we really took a hard look at, but it induced a little additional risk that if it fell off that truck on the left-hand side, we'd be weeks behind in data copies. So we really focused on the 100 terabyte data box. And we were wildly successful in migrating these multiple sites to the Azure cloud. So a lot of the technologies we used, obviously we needed to extend our AD up into Azure. The IaaS, we had to provision multiple Windows file servers, the data box obviously, Azure Backup, Express Route Networking, Azure Monitoring. Branch cache wasn't something new for us, where we're caching those files locally on site. So we improved that customer experience, and we improved the end user experience, being able to open those files rapidly versus the latency times that may be where they're, accessing something on the East Coast from the East Coast that's actually on the West Coast. So with the Fast Track team's help, we were successful in putting those at each of the locations. And our end user experience has been pretty good so far at this point. So I don't want to read through each of these outcomes. I do want to highlight number 3 and number 5. Using Azure as a strategic asset. We're really talking about an IT operations shop that's really taking a journey from tactical to strategic. We're looking at Office 365. We want to continue doing data center migrations and using things like site replication to get their workloads into Azure, Windows Virtual Desktop, and continue to help them transform the business and remove themselves from the technical debt they have on site today. And number 5, where we're looking at the cloud native tools, whether it's Azure Sentinel that was the previous presentation, it's Azure Monitor, Log Analytics. We're really trying to help our customer drive those cost savings, in addition to driving revenue for CGI as a business. And as we work with our customer and we continue down this journey, we're really helping them do that digital transformation and continue on with that. As they try to figure out how they get out of all of the debt that they've incurred over the years. So, and with that, I'm going to pass it to Anthony Delegard from the Microsoft Fast Track team, who is our partner and a key member in helping us with this transformation.
Hey, thanks a lot, John. All right, so Ray, can you position the slides next? So one of the things that we've done at Microsoft for the last several years when we're conducting large-scale migrations into Azure, these are probably the major tenets right here that you want to look at as basically the recommended steps and lessons learned from migrations. The first thing you want to do is inventory and rationalize your data before you actually begin a migration project. One of the things you want to find out is, in this type of situation, is regulatorily what files can actually be moved to the Azure, what has to be remain behind, and also in addition, account for any data silos that might be hidden off in a different unconnected region or connected data center that just for whatever reason time forgot. But this is most important things you want to do. The second thing that you will also want to do is also partner with the executive leadership and the executive sponsor immediately. Sometimes our focus tends to look at basically the infrastructure engineer and maybe 1 or 2 security people. You need to really include everybody from the top to the bottom, everything from the data owner, the business, the segments within the organization, everybody that has a key stakeholder position within the company. The one thing you also want to do is be very, very, very direct and explicit in terms of your actual orchestration and management of how you plan to move your data up into Azure, so that at any given point in time, people that are a little bit, let's say, antsy about moving to the cloud, this is a new thing, you give them that extra comfort. But you also want to give milestone dates and activities that are going to occur during that process and time. The third thing that we definitely always want to look at is prune the data that can be archived directly to cool tier if possible. This is something right here that we advise, rather than having to go in and actually moving everything up to Azure, move it up to a file store, move it up to a VM, then do some type of migration and archive process at a later date. That typically doesn't very work well. If possible, at all times, try and prune the older bit of data that's no longer used. Do you really need that Lotus 123 file in Azure? Something from back in the 80s. That's the things that you want to look at for. The other thing that I would do, and this is big, is ensure that your data center on-premise actually has the environment to be able to support this. Does your switches have the exact ports and actually density to support a migration to Azure Data Box? One of the things that comes with the Azure Data Box is you actually have fiber connections as well as Ethernet RJ45 connections. So if you're able to take advantage of, say, a fiber switch or an extra ports that are connected to your NAS unit, please do that, okay? Trying to go over basically a 1 gig connection or 2 gig connection, you're only going to add a lot of latency to your actual file copies, which you can conduct over either NFS or SMB3 v3. And then last also is you'll want to make sure that in the region, it's come up a lot that our Azure data centers are really exploding.
Hayden, can you go down and get,
Hey.
Okay, Mimi, can you do that for me?
Karina,
I'm going to send them.
all right, great
No,
talk.
it wasn't me. I think we have someone else we need to mute.
All right, no problem. So love the teleconferences in the modern age. But anyway, thanks, Karina. We also want to make sure that the regions you're going to with Azure actually have the proper capacity. We've had an explosion of Azure that's going on ever since the beginning of the year. People are moving to it. Please work with your partners and also your Microsoft representatives to figure out if the actual region has the data to support. The other thing also too is you want to make sure you don't have multiple migrations happening at the same time. You can't do an Office 365 migration. You can't do a network MPLS migration when you're also moving to Azure. These things all have to be layered on top of each other and orchestrated very carefully. With that said, can you please go to the next slide? All right, so my friend and colleague, Alan Lady, unfortunately is not going to be able to join us due to personal things. We wish him well tonight. I'll cover the part right here that is included here by the Azure Fast Track Program Management. So how can you participate and get actually the goodness and partner with Microsoft and use it as a strategic event process with your team? First of all, what you can do is if you have an enterprise agreement, pay-as-you-go, or CSP, or any type of program that within Azure, you qualify automatically. What you have to have is at least have a valid project to migrate into Azure. Also, in addition to that right there, we're looking to have within that project at least a $5,000 spend that comes up with a commitment into Azure. You can come through either a Microsoft partner, and you can nominate your customer. You can be also a federal or a commercial customer and nominate yourself if you wanted to. But usually we have an account team that will take care of it. In the bottom right here, we have the links for you to join and actually start the process to get information about Fast Track, as well as all of the actual technologies that we cover. And with that, I will move quickly towards our Q&A session. Next slide, please. Thank you, Ray. So we're kind of running up short on time, but we still have some questions and answers we can probably support. All right. Does anybody see any questions here?
Fast Track, does that include O365 aside from Azure?
Yes, there's a different team that supports Fast Track Dynamics and O365 mail migrations and SharePort migrations. That also exists. For this particular program, we are primarily work with Azure, both IaaS and Platform as a Service migrations.
I don't see any others for now, Anthony, but watch the chat and maybe they'll come rolling in.
Okay. Come on, is everybody like a little timid tonight? I know there's probably a migration going on somewhere.
You can think of Anthony as your migration doctor.
Yeah. And by the way, in addition to this, not only do we work with the Microsoft platform, we also work with a lot of open source. The primary drivers during this migration, we had a lot of NetApp. We also had a lot of open source that we had to work with. So we're not only bound by Microsoft products. We're basically heterogeneous when it comes to that right there.
All right, we have a question. Any info on when phone capability available in GCC High?
That would be an Office 365 question right there, and I would direct you towards those links. Maybe after this, we could probably give you that information. But if you have a question about Azure file shares, we can help you with that. We now do support 100 terabyte shares on Azure. We also support file migrations at speed. And also within the Chevy Chase area in Washington, D.C., if you're in the actual metropolitan area, guess what? We also have a white glove migration service that if you want to, you can bring your data into our office and we will help you move your data on a 10 gig express route up into Azure, no charge. As long as you're a partner, an associate, or actually a customer, and you actually have a valid project, we will help you migrate and move that data up into Azure.
Okay, and we have one more question. Are these challenges typical for most government clients?
Yes, most of these challenges tend to be very typical. Most customers right here that they're looking to move, they've got 30 years worth of data. And for the last, when I first started in 2014, 2015, if people said just cloud, just get out there, they were literally trying to give me a roundhouse kick and telling me get out of my office. Now it's all about that. We're having a lot of data centers that are moving and decommissioning. And what we see is a lot of these aging data centers don't have necessarily the infrastructure to support the migration. So sometimes you might have to think out the box. Also, in addition to that, you might have a very large, powerful SAN or NAS system, but unfortunately, sometimes the actual connections on that SAN have either been not used because the fiber switch is like really old and doesn't have enough port density. So these are some of the things you have to look for and also plan as well.
And also to build on top of that, Tony, it's really pivotal. It's really important that you partner with the legal department of your customer and make sure they understand that the cloud that you are migrating to has the extra attestation and all the requirements from a security and compliance perspective that they're going to be needing, right? Because we're talking about the public sector. There's a lot of data residency. There's a lot of background checks that needs to be done, and they need to feel comfortable before green lighting this type of migrations.
Yeah, and like I said, it also helps to have a good relationship with your partner. In this case, we had the pleasure to work with both John Blandon and Kristen Barnes from CGI Federal. They have been working with us over many years, CGI Federal in different areas, and they understood their customer very well. They came in, they had a real tough customer to work with, but with working with them, with the relationship and how they actually brought us in as a strategic advantage for their customer, it really helped.
Here's another question. How did data syncing work?
Sure. What we did basically is we took the data that we had on-prem, we loaded it up into our data box, we shipped it. Once it got into the Azure environment, the customer then moved the data from the Azure storage into the Azure file shares. And then from there, we actually then started doing the data sync, basically doing any type of deltas. Part of the problem was at the time was we could not go over the wire because the customer was doing a upgrade to their MPLS and their connection to the network. And the folks under John and Kristen, they did a knockout job of actually copying the data, moving the data up into Azure. They end up scripting a lot of that out and putting it in the actual file shares. And from there, they were able to actually connect that and have a distribution between East and West through normal means. And they literally are connecting their offices, like 16 units, into Azure. And right now, there is no, what's the word I would say? There is no differentiation where the file is. Is it in Azure? Is it locally? And also they're having some caches, on-prem branch cache to protect the environment if there's basically any type of congestion, like, the 9 o'clock, the 12 o'clock just before lunch and 5 o'clock in the afternoon before they go home. So it was a good relationship right there. The main issue that I would say is if you're planning to move data off of a NAS, the biggest issue right there is the copying of the actual ACLs to the net, our data box, and then doing the file syncs on the timestamps as well as the ACLs. If it's a window file server, it's a little bit more easier. We are working on that capability right now to actually get, like, say, a third-party capability for like Azure, in Azure to actually consume and work with on-prem SANs and NASs, which tend to be like either BSD or Linux flavor.
So as you can tell, Anthony's very passionate about this topic. Anthony, there's a question of how to reach you later. So we'll let you answer those IM questions directly as we move on to our panel. So thank you, CGI and Microsoft, for the last presentation. It was great. I learned a lot.